Good morning, everyone. I'm Shambhavi Sharma, Director ICI Toronto Chapter, and I welcome you all to our today's session on obtaining a Canadian CPA, how to prepare and pass the CFE, time-sensitive limited window to write the CFE. Before we begin the session, I would like to introduce our speakers for the day, Michael Levy and Ira Wolfish. They are experienced mentors, educators, and expert coaches at PASS. They have been associated with ICI Toronto chapter for the past 5 years and have graciously agreed to take a session for our Indian CAs who are CPA aspirants. PAS is one of the few CPA coaching institutes in the country who offer precise guidance for internationally qualified CAs from other countries to prepare and successfully become Canadian CPAs. Over to you, Michael and Ira.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you
introduction.
very much.
I'll be doing a portion of the presentation. My partner Ira will be doing the second portion. I'd like to welcome everybody to the session for Indian CAs on how to achieve your Canadian CPA. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the details, I have the slide here, which I think describes what's involved in getting a Canadian CPA. It's not a walk in the park. I won't lie to anybody and tell anybody that it's an easy undertaking. On the other hand, it is very doable. It requires patience. It certainly requires a great deal of hard work. It requires a great deal of persistence and discipline. But with all that, it's certainly very doable. We're very proud of the many Indian CAs who have actually participated in our course over the years and have actually achieved, with hard work, their Canadian CPA. So let's talk now about the details of what we're going to be covering over the course of this morning. Before I get into any further detail, just want to mention, please feel free to ask questions at any point in time. My preference is that you ask questions orally. It's always nice to hear voices other than my own and Ira's. But if you prefer to use a chat box, you're welcome to. But by all means, feel free to speak up and ask your questions orally. So this is what we'd like to cover over the course of the morning. We're going to start with an overview of the CPA program and the CP, the common final exam that you need to write. We're going to talk about changes to the CPA program in 027, which make it very important that you write the exam sooner rather than later. You'll understand that very, very clearly when we get to point 2. We'll talk about the 2 main components that make up the CP. The CP is a case-based exam. So we'll talk about the need to learn how to write cases, but it's also quite a technical exam. So we'll also talk about acquiring the technical knowledge that you need. We'll then move on in point 4 to the program for Indian students. As was mentioned in the introduction, Ira and I developed the program specifically for Indian CAs many years ago. We realized that Indian CAs have needs that are quite different from Canadians. Unlike Canadians, they didn't go through a Canadian university program. So unlike Canadians, they didn't have a chance to learn to write cases throughout their university studies. Furthermore, some of the technical was specific to India rather than Canada. For example, taxation in India is very different than taxation in Canada. So we decided that we need to have a program specifically designed for Indian CAs. We set out to do that a number of years ago, and we've been offering that ever since. Ira will take over in point number 4 and describe in detail the program that we've designed for Indian CAs. We'll take a look at the schedules, depending on whether you're planning to write the CP in May or September. We'll show you some testimonials from prior students who've taken the past course and been successful, prior students just like yourselves who were educated in India and had obtained an Indian CA. We'll just speak very briefly about registration with PASS and fees, as well as registration with a CPA Provincial Institute. In order to write your exam, you need to either register with the CPA Provincial Institute, or if you're in one of the Western provinces, with the CPA Western School of Business. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. For those of you who are not living in Canada yet, again, I don't know how many people we have like that. I think the majority of people we're speaking to today are in Canada. We do have a couple of slides on planning immigration. We don't plan to go into that in detail. Number one, because most of the people here today, not almost all of the people, are already in Canada. And furthermore, neither Ira nor myself is an immigration expert. So we have a couple of slides that you might find helpful if you're still in India, but we won't actually be going over them in detail this morning. And then finally, we'll give you some contact information. Even after we go through all the detail in today's presentation, I am sure you'll still have some questions. And should you have questions following today's session, anytime, please feel free to contact Ira or myself, and we'll give you the contact information at the end of the session. So let me start now with part one. Part one is a description of the CPA program and the CP. Let me start first with what a typical Canadian student needs to do in order to achieve their CPA. And then I can contrast that with what an Indian CA would need to do. For Canadian students, it's a fairly lengthy process. They have to first take technical modules called Core 1 and Core 2. Core 1 is basically dealing with financial accounting primarily. Core 2 is dealing primarily with management accounting. And then they have to do some technical specialties. They have to choose from a number of different technical specialties and write and take another 2 modules called the elective modules. They then have to go on to Capstone 1. We'll describe it in more detail in a few minutes, but for now, Capstone 1 is basically a big business case that they need to work on. They would then go on to Capstone 2, which involves writing prior CP cases, and then finally, they would get to the CP. So it's quite a lengthy process if you're a Canadian student. As I mentioned before, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, Capstone 1 is basically it's not an exam-based module, but rather it's a module in which you work as part of a group on a business case and present a report. And then, as I mentioned before, Capstone 2, you're writing practice CP cases. Now, each of these modules is generally about 7 to 8 weeks, followed by an exam. So other than Capstone 1 and 2, which do not have an exam, the other 4 modules, Core 1, Core 2, as well as the elective modules involve an exam. So again, there are quite a few loops you got to get through if you're a Canadian CA. Or I'm sorry, if you're a Canadian student trying to achieve their Canadian CPA. The beautiful thing about being an Indian CA is that you can avoid a lot of this. You don't need to do Core 1 and Core 2. You don't need to go through the technical modules. You don't even need to go through Capstone 1 and 2. You go directly to the CP. So you're exempt from everything except for the final exam. Now, in case anybody's wondering when the upcoming CPs are going to be written, the 2025 CP will be written May 27th to 29th. And there'll be another CP September 9th to 11th. Every year there are 2 CPs. One is generally at the end of May and one is in September. So here's just a diagram that basically points out the difference between an Indian CA and a Canadian student trying to get their CPA. As you can see, you're exempt from the technical modules, which is Core 1, Core 2, and the 2 electives I just described. You're exempt from Capstone 1 and 2. All you've got to do as an Indian CA is go directly to the CP. What I'd like to do now is give you a description of the CP. The CP, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, is a case-based exam. So it's very much quite different than the Indian CA exam. On the Indian CA exam, to the best of our knowledge, based on our discussions with our students, does not have large cases that need to be written. As you'll see in a moment when I look at the exam in more detail, there are large cases that need to be written as part of the CP, and the whole CP is case-based. There is no multiple choice. There are no short answer questions. It is 100% case-based. And one of the skills you need to learn in order to write the CP is the ability to deal with multiple issues from multiple subject areas all in one case. So it's not like the cases are single subject. You know, I'm going to write a case on financial accounting, or I'm going to write a case on management accounting. All of the cases involve more than one subject area, what we call competency in the lingo of the CP. The time for the cases can range anywhere from 70 minutes to as long as 5 hours. So again, there are no short cases. The shortest case we have is 70 minutes, and the longest is 5 hours. Let me take a look here before I go any further. I see there are questions in the chat box. Let's take a look at them. Puman asks, for Indian CAs, Is it mandatory to complete 2 years of experience after CA qualified to enroll? The work experience I'm not going to get into because it really does depend on your situation. Do you have a university degree? Do you not have a university degree? At the end of the session, I'm going to give you links, or Ira will give you links that deal specifically with international students and specifically with Indian students, where this information will be delineated. So if you don't mind, we'll give you the links where you can actually see the details, and then you can see what you would need to do in your particular situation. The next CP is in May. Rahim is asking about the next CP. The next CP is in May 2025. That is correct. Okay, yeah, we got. I see somebody else answered that question. Okay, great. On a short case, you need to read 5 or 6 pages, and on a long case, as many as 15 to 20 pages. So even the short cases I mentioned a moment ago, even the short cases are not really very short. They're just shorter than the long cases. Typically, the way that a case looks is you typically have about a page with the main body of the case. Sometimes it could be a page and a bit. It's not unusual to have a page plus a paragraph or two, but it's generally not longer than that. And then the rest of the case is made up by appendices. Even on a shorter case, even on a 70 or 80-minute case, you can have 4 or 5 appendices. On a 5-hour case, you can have a lot more than that. So most of the information is in the appendices. In case people don't know what I mean by the main body of a case, this is an example from a simulated past case. As you can see from the simulated case, you have the main body here. In the main body, generally you're told what most of the requireds are. What are most of the things you're required to do? And then the appendices contain most of the information you need to address the requireds. There can be the odd required in an appendix, but most of the requireds are given to you in the main body. This is an example of a main body of a case. You've all received, you all have the PowerPoint. So if you want to look at the main body more closely yourselves at some point, feel free to do so. Now let's talk about the breakdown of the CP. The CP is 3 days long. Day 1 is a large 4-hour case based on Capstone 1. So we mentioned earlier when I was giving you an overview that Capstone 1 is a module that all Canadian students must take, in which you work on a big business case together. And at the end of the module, you do a presentation to a board of directors, both an oral presentation as well as a written presentation. It's based on a fictional company. When you walk into day 1 of the CP, the case you're going to be writing is based on that same fictional company that you worked on when you were doing Capstone 1. So that raises a question that I think many Indian CAs would be concerned about, and that is, if I'm exempt from Capstone 1, and I therefore choose not to go to Capstone 1, which is the case for the vast majority of Indian CAs, the vast majority of our students do not go to Capstone 1. In that case, how am I going to be prepared for day 1, which is based on Capstone 1? So let me explain. The way that day 1 works is you're dealing with the same fictional company as I mentioned a moment ago, but you're now dealing with new issues that the company is facing. It may be a number of years down the road, and the company is facing new operational and strategic issues, and you need to deal with it. So how do I deal with these issues if I never took Capstone 1? So the answer is that at PASS, what we will do is we will give you a summary of all the information you need to know from Capstone 1 so that you can write day 1 effectively, and therefore you're not going to have a problem. Okay? I see over here that there's a question about a letter of good standing. Where they charge for assessing my letter of good standing. They also might undergo another assessment or another. Okay, I'll be honest with you. Neither Ira nor I can get into the issue of what the various institutes do. I really can't add a lot of value here. I mean, when you're dealing with the institute, if you want further understanding, you need to deal with the institute. You know what I mean? We're independent of the Western School of Business. We're independent of CPA Ontario. For those sort of things, you really do need to deal with the Western School of Business. There's not a whole lot that Ira and I can do when it comes to your dealings with the provincial institutes or the Western School of Business. I'm sorry about that. On day 2, you would be writing a large 5-hour case. The 5-hour case on day 2 is referred to as the roll case. You'll see in a moment why it's referred to as a roll case. In a nutshell, you choose a specific role on that day. We'll explain that in more detail when we get to the day 2 case. On day 3, you're going to be writing 3 short cases. Each case will be anywhere from 70 to 90 minutes, and all 3 cases will add up to 4 hours. These cases are often referred to as multi-competency cases because they'll test a number of different competencies, a number of different subject areas. And we often refer to these cases as multi for short. So when Ira or I use the term multi, we mean a day 3 case. All cases test more than one competency, more than one subject. But as you'll see in a few minutes, the multi cases test more competencies than the day 2 case, which is the roll case. I see there's another question. You said group presentation. Can you elaborate on this? Basically, the way it works is, again, most people don't take Capstone 1, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in it because hardly any Indians take it. But basically, what you're doing is you're supposed to come up with a presentation that would be similar to the type of presentation that one would do for a board of directors or a group of senior executives. So in Capstone 1, you're generally dealing with high-level business type issues, the sort of issues that you would bring at the highest level within the organization to a board of directors. So this presentation is first submitted in writing, and then it's presented as a group orally. And then following the presentation, the simulated board of directors or the simulated group of senior executives would then pepper the group with questions. It's all done as a group. Nothing is done individually. That's basically in a nutshell how the presentation works. I hope that answers your question, Rain. Hello, my name is... Continuing onward, I keep mentioning about competencies. I said in the previous slide that on day 3, many competencies are tested. On day 2, a lesser number of competencies is tested. By competencies, I mean subject areas. There are 6 competencies or 6 subject areas that are examinable on the CP. Audit and assurance, financial reporting, management accounting, finance, taxation, and then strategy and governance. Let's now look at each day individually, okay? Oh, Akil asks, how do we select day 1 case if we're not doing Capstone 1? And when do we select it, assuming a period in May 2025? So at the end of the day, every year, they have 2 day 1 cases that they give you a choice from. One is from a previous CP, and it's intended generally for repeat writers who wrote the CP, who wrote that particular CP. And then there's a new Capstone 1 case. You would generally take the new Capstone 1 case. Unless you're a repeat writer, you would take the new Capstone 1 case. You're not going to have to make your choice until well into the new year. Okay, so you don't have to decide that yet. Well into the new year, you're going to be getting a letter from or an email from whoever you registered with, whether it's out west or CPA Ontario for many of you. And at that point, you'll make your choice. You have a long time until you need to make that choice. But it's not a difficult choice to make, quite honestly, because as long as you're not a repeat writer, you would take the new case that was developed for your CP. Okay, and Keith is asking, we're exempt from Capstone 2. However, if one opts to take it, will that benefit us for the CP? Okay, I don't want to get too much into this because Ira will address this in more detail later on. But in a nutshell, there's no question in the world that Capstone 2 is extremely helpful for the CP. Because what Capstone 2 does is it has you writing practice CP cases, which are marked professionally. And that gives you a wonderful opportunity to practice writing real CP cases. So is Capstone 2 useful? No question. However, because PASS believes that Capstone 2 is very important, we have come up with an equivalent to Capstone 2 that you can attend through PASS, and it's a great deal less expensive than going to CPA Canada's Capstone 2. So yes, it's important, but we recommend that you do it through PASS, as you'll get basically the same same experience in writing practice cases, and the same opportunity to have them professionally marked as if you went to CPA Canada's Capstone 2, but at a much lesser cost. But I'd rather say no more at this point, as Ira will be addressing that in his presentation. Let's take a look now at day one of the CP. On day one of the CP, you're going to write one large 4-hour case. As I mentioned before, it's based on the Capstone 1 case. You're dealing with the same fictional company, but now they're dealing with new issues, new strategic and operational issues a number of years down the road. It's marked separately from days 2 and 3. It's simply a pass or fail. And because it's marked separately from days 2 and 3, you can pass day 1 and unfortunately potentially fail days 2 and 3, in which case you'd only have to write day 2 and 3 on its own. You wouldn't have to write day 1 again. Day 1 is marked separately from days 2 and 3. You don't get a mark, you just get a pass or fail. It's not intended to be very technical. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's based on Capstone 1, and Capstone 1 is meant to be dealing with high-level business issues, high-level analysis, as opposed to days 2 and 3, which are far more technical. Now let's take a look at day 2 of the CP. Day 2 of the CP, I mentioned earlier, is a 5-hour case, and I called it earlier a roll case. You'll see in a moment why it's called a roll case. The day 2 case will test financial accounting and or management accounting. In theory, they only have to test one or the other. In practice, in the last 5 years or so, there hasn't been one CP that didn't test both. So there's about a 95 or 99% probability that you will be tested on both financial and management accounting on day 2 of the CP. Now, why is it called a roll case? The reason why it's called a roll case is everybody needs to deal with financial accounting and management accounting. But the remaining things you're going to need to do on this case will relate to the role that you chose. And you'll have a choice of 4 roles. You can choose audit, you can choose tax, you can choose performance management, which is a combination of management accounting and strategy and governance, or you can choose finance. So at the end of the day, you're typically going to be dealing with 3 competencies: financial accounting and management accounting, plus whatever role you chose. So if I chose audit and assurance, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to deal in all likelihood with financial accounting and management accounting. Even though they only have to test one, they generally test both. So I'll have to deal with financial and management accounting. And then all the remaining requires that I need to deal with will relate to assurance. If, on the other hand, the person next to me, sitting next to me in the exam, chose tax, she's going to have to deal with the same financial accounting and management accounting issues as I deal with. But on top of that, all the rest of her requirements are going to relate to tax. So at the end of the day, that is why this is called the roll case, because you're choosing a specific role and the requires you deal with is a function of that. You don't have to choose your role for a long time still. Fairly shortly before the CP, you'll be asked to choose a role. So it's not something you have to think about for quite a while. Day 3 of the CP, you're going to be writing 3 cases, which will add up to 4 hours, each case being from 70 to 90 minutes. Unlike the case of the roll comp, where the maximum of the roll case, where the maximum number of competencies you're going to deal with is 3, financial management accounting plus your role, on day 3 of the CP, you're going to be dealing with anywhere between 4 and 6 competencies. So when you look at these 6 competencies here, you may have to deal with all 6 on one 90-minute case or 80-minute case. The minimum you'll be dealing with on a day 3 case is going to be 4 of these competencies. Unlike the case of day 2, everybody writes exactly the same cases. You don't choose a role for day 3. Day 2 and day 3 are marked together. So let's say you're unsuccessful, as we said earlier, on day 2 and 3. You would only have to write day 2 and 3. You would not have to write day 1 again. So at the end of the day, if you fail day 1, you repeat day 1. If you fail day 2 and 3, you repeat day 2 and 3. So the nice thing here is it's not like if I miss one day, I have to write the whole exam again. I missed day 1, Okay, that's unfortunate. I'll write day one again, but if I pass day two and three, I don't have to write those again. And the same thing would be true vice versa. Here are some key facts. Akhil asks, is it correct to say that one is tested on the competency they choose only on day two? No, the way it works, Akhil, is these competencies, audit, tax, PM, finance, can come up throughout the CP. But on day two, you would be tested on these competencies in more depth. You would be, if I chose, for example, audit as my depth area, as my role on day two, that's the opportunity that the CP has to test me at a very high level on that particular competency. So although audit can also come up on day three, it would come up at a lower level on day three than day two. Day two is the opportunity to test you on a given role at a higher level. Is that clear, Akhil? I was told earlier, this is Jay. Okay, great. Thank you. You're welcome, Akhil. Jay asks, I was told earlier that if I failed day one but passed day two and three, then I would be required to pass day one to three again. You were told incorrectly. Okay, whoever told you that was just mistaken. Okay, unfortunately, we have had students who've unfortunately failed day one and passed day two and three, and they only wrote day one again. Okay, this is from personal experience. Okay, let's continue onward. Here are some key facts about the CP. Everyone in Canada writes the same CP exam. It's a national exam. So although you register with a provincial institute like CPA Ontario, or if you're out west, the Western School of Business, you're still writing the same exam. You're just dealing with a provincial institute for administrative purposes. You've got 3 attempts. Hopefully you won't need those three attempts, but you do have 3 attempts in case you need them. The exam is written on computer using Word and Excel, so nothing is handed in handwriting. Typically, the qualitative portion of your answer, you'll be writing in Word, and the quants you'd be doing in Excel. But the actual question itself, the actual exam itself, is given to you in physical paper form. It's an open book exam, so to speak, because you have access to the CPA handbook that has the accounting standards as well as the assurance standards. You also have access to the Tax Act, so you don't have to memorize everything. Obviously, you only have limited time to refer to your handbook, so you still need to come into the exam with a fair amount of knowledge. But if you can't remember every last detail, you can look it up on the exam. It doesn't matter in which Canadian province you write your exam, because you can write the exam in one province and then practice in another province. CPAs in Canada move all the time. So, there are lots of CPAs who wrote their exam, say in Montreal, Quebec, and then they decided to move to Toronto, Ontario. No problem. Once you have your CPA, because it's a national exam, it doesn't matter at all in what province you wrote it. You can move to any province you like. Any further questions before I move on to part 2? Average number of hours required for preparation. Okay, bottom line is the actual number of hours really varies student by student. So Ira actually has a study plan that he puts together, which you can find on the PASS website, where he gets into this in a great deal of detail, far more detail than I can get into right now. But at the end of the day, the number of hours you're going to need is going to be a function, number one, of when you start studying for the exam. The earlier you start, and Ira will talk about when it's optimal to start, the lesser the number of hours you're going to need to spend. It'll also depend on how good your knowledge is. We have some students who just wrote their exam in India 2 years ago, and they're very up in IFRS, and they're up in on other technical. They would, of course, need less time than somebody who isn't up on their technical. So there are a number of factors that go into it. Most people will need a good 10 to 15 hours a week, but that's an oversimplified answer. I suggest you listen to what Ira has to say when he talks about when to start studying, and you look at the study plan posted on our website for further detail. Nikunj asks, if we select tax in day 2 and not audit, we are not allowed to sign financials in Canada. Okay, at the end of the day, no matter what you choose, okay, as an Indian CA, regardless of whether you choose tax or assurance, you would have to write additional exams before you get your public accountant's license that allows you to sign financials in Canada. So one can either write the assurance and tax module electives that I mentioned at the beginning of class, but very few people do that. Almost nobody does that. Or you can write another exam called the PDPA exam after you write your CP, and that would also allow you to get your public accountant's license. The PDPA exam is far less involved than the CP, and if you pass the CP, you shouldn't have a problem passing it. So regardless of what you choose, you would have to write a further exam. Canadian students who went through PEP, who did all the modules, for them, if they choose assurance rather than tax, they don't have to write any additional exams. But because you didn't go through PEP, you do have to write an additional exam, regardless of the role that you choose. Is exam questions stored in computer or only paper form? No, the actual question is given to you in hard copy, but you will be writing your response on computer. The qualitative portion in Word, the quants in Excel. Do we need to register for all days at initiation, or can we choose for first registered applicants? Can you explain Raheem, if you don't mind speaking up, maybe you can explain what you mean by that. You mean, do I have to register for all 3 days? Is that what you're asking? I'm not clear what your question is. No, yes, you do have to register for all 3 days. There's no such a thing as just registering for day 1 or day 2 and 3. Obviously, if you fail day 2 and 3 and you pass day 1, then you would only register the following year to write day 2 and 3. But otherwise, the first time you write, you're registering for all of the days. Abinayas asks, is it an open book exam? Do we have access to our own notes? No, you do not. No, you just have access to the handbook and the Tax Act. You do not have access to your own notes. Jay asks, so it doesn't matter if we opt for finance rather than assurance, we'd be required to give the PDPA for getting the license to sign financials. That's 100% correct. If you were a Canadian, if you had come through the Canadian system, then it would make a difference. But as an Indian CA, it does not matter. Either way, you'd have to write an additional exam, the PDPA exam. If you haven't written the tax and insurance electives, which is a case for almost all Indian CAs, yes, you would in any case have to write another exam. Does the handbook refer to the one in Kenosha? Yes, it's basically in yes, that's correct. Okay, let's move on now. Oh, we have another question. What are the assessment criteria for passing? I mean to say, what is pass percentage? Can you elaborate if you have not? So I'm not sure what you mean by that. Are you asking me how they determine whether you pass, or you're asking me the percentage of people who pass? Okay, in terms, there is something called the passing profile, which is quite complicated, and without an in-depth understanding of the marking of the exam, it would be impossible for me to explain it to you in just, in 2 minutes. The bottom line is that a major goal in this exam, when you're writing cases, is to achieve what they call competent, to show that you're competent in various assessment opportunities. And depending on how you perform, they decide whether you're going to pass or not. In a nutshell, in order to pass, you have to show strength in either management or financial accounting. You have to show strength in the role that you chose on day 2. And you have to have a basic knowledge of all 6 competencies. But it's hard for me to get into more detail than that at this point. When we go through our very first class, in the very first class called Case Writing Techniques, following our introductory class, we explain to you how the exam is marked, and then we go through in detail the passing profile. In terms of the pass rate, it really varies from year to year, but probably about, it'll probably be about 70%. The rate, I can't tell you what the rate is specifically for Indian CAs. We've had a lot of success with Indian CAs, but they don't publish the specific pass rate for Indian CAs. What is the procedure to select the elective area? You're going to be getting a communication from whomever you registered with, whether it's CPA Ontario or if you're out west, the Western School of Business, and they're going to ask you closer to the time of the CP which elective area you'd like to choose. At this point, I'd rather not get into detail as to how you make that choice because you don't have enough knowledge yet of the CP to make an informed. But in a nutshell, you would obviously choose that role where you're strongest. If I'm very strong in assurance, I'll choose assurance. If I'm stronger in finance, I'll choose finance. It doesn't matter what work you're planning to do. Employers do not typically ask you, what was your role on the CP? So it's really a question of what you're strongest at. Would the past tax module help to cover the in-depth tax module of the CPA program? I don't know what that means, Keith. What you say the in-depth tax module of the CPA program, what are you talking about? I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you're asking me, will the past notes help you if you choose the tax role? The answer is yes. The past notes, along with an ebook that's put out by CPA Canada, will certainly help you get through the tax rule if you choose to do so. Very few Indian CAs choose the tax rule just because tax in India is so different from tax in Canada. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about. There is something called an in-depth tax course that people practicing CAs take who want to practice tax as a specialty, which is done following the CA. As you say, it's a separate certificate. No, PASS does not get into that. That's really not PASS's role. Our role is to train you to become a CPA. Once you're a CPA, if you decide you want to be a tax specialist and you want to do this 3-year certificate, then you would be doing that through CPA Canada. You would not be doing that through PASS. Okay, I hope that was clear. Let's move on now to part 2, which is changes to the CPA program in 027. It was mentioned in the introduction that things are changing in 027. The bottom line is the CPA education program is being completely revamped in 027. And what they're telling us, and again, nobody really knows how things are going to land at this point. Things are in great flux right now. But it appears that, at least from what I'm being told right now, is they are expecting to replace the CPA with other exams. The competency map, which is effectively a syllabus that you follow to determine what you're going to be examined on, that we know for sure will be significantly changed to emphasize additional items beyond the traditional subjects that are relevant to CPA designation. So there'll be a greater emphasis on data analytics, organizational behavior, sustainability, etc., which I don't think is, quite frankly, in your favor, because a lot of these additional areas are areas you would not have been tested on in your Indian CA. So it just introduces new areas that you're unlikely to be that familiar with. The exact nature of the exam, as I mentioned a moment ago, very much up in the air. We hear new things every day, so the dust has not yet settled at all there. That's why they actually put off the new program. The new program was really supposed to start in 025, then they put it off for a couple of years. So I'd be lying to you if I could tell you what the new exams will look like. They'll probably still be an CP in 2027, but it's a question of who will be eligible to write it. It may only be eligible for people who already wrote the CP earlier and failed and needed to write again. And as far as the MOU with India goes, that's not something that CPA Canada has even thought about yet at this point. I mean, they don't even know what the new system is going to look like, so it would be premature to talk about an MOU. But even if there turns out to be an MOU, and it's possible there will be, it still doesn't tell us how many exams you're going to have to write. Depending on the nature of the new system, you might have to write 1 exam, you might have to write 2 exams, who knows? You might have to write 3 exams. It all depends on the nature of the system. So if you want to cut your risk and you want to deal with the devil you know, because again, the CP is not easy. It's difficult. It takes hard work and effort. But at least it's something you know. At least it's a known entity. It's a known quantity. At least you're not going to be a guinea pig, so to speak. So my strong recommendation to you would be write, if at all possible, in 025. If for some reason you can't write in 025, write in 026, because who knows what you're going to need to do in 027. Number one, you may end up having to write more than 1 exam. Nobody knows. And also, who wants to be the first group to write a brand new exam? At least with a CP, you've got years and years of previous CPs you can look at. So you know exactly what you're up against. When you're the guinea pigs for a new exam, it's very, very hard to prepare. Now I'm going to talk about case writing and technical. I mentioned earlier that this is a case-based exam. So probably the biggest challenge that Indian CAs face, and again, it's a surmountable challenge, so don't worry. But the biggest challenge Indian CAs face is case writing. Because Indian CAs, unlike Canadian students, did not write large cases throughout their university studies. So now suddenly they have to learn how to write cases. So a huge, huge emphasis, as Ira will describe when he describes the past course, is teaching you how to write cases. The earlier you start, the better, because at the end of the day, we find that different people take different amounts of time to learn how to write cases. Some people catch on really quickly, some people take longer. So the longer you give yourself, the better. If you can start your studying about a year in advance of the CP, so that would be absolutely ideal. It's now October. If you were to write in September, you'd have almost a year. That would be ideal. It's still probably not too late to write in May, but as we'll discuss in more detail later, the bottom line is you want to leave yourselves a lot of time to prepare. Because again, most people can't learn how to write cases overnight, just not the nature of case writing. Now, you're writing the cases and you're studying while you're working full time typically. As long as you have a job, there's no need to quit your job. The system is designed so people can study while they're working. Okay. So at the end of the day, the beauty of this system is you can be financially supporting yourself while you're studying. And you would typically be writing practice cases and studying technical together. Some of the technical you're going to study on its own in isolation. Other technical you're going to learn from the case writing. And we'll get into that in a lot more detail when you get to the course. I see that Amit has a question. How can we get hold of previous year CP questions and suggested answers? So the bottom line is, if you were to Google CP reports in Google, they would take you to the CPA website where they've got past CP questions as well as suggested answers. If you want detailed marking guides, that you'd have to purchase closer to the time of the CP. But if you just want to be able to see the questions and the suggested answers, you could do that right after the session. Just put into Google CP reports and you'll have a chance to see past CP questions and suggested answers. Now, I mentioned earlier that you could learn some of your technical from case writing, but you would also spend a certain amount of time just studying technical on its own. The two biggest areas tested on the CP are financial accounting, and there's a lot to know there. That's probably where you need the largest body of knowledge because you need to know both IFRS, which some of you are familiar with, but you also need to know ASPE, which probably none of you or hardly any of you are familiar with unless you're already working in Canada and dealing with financial accounting. So I should say, if you're working in it, you probably do know something about ASPE. Otherwise, you probably don't. The reason why you wouldn't know about it unless you're working in it is ASPE is accounting standards that were developed specifically for private enterprise, and they basically were developed within Canada. So they're not used outside of Canada. So unless you're working with ASPE, that would be something new that you would need to learn. The second the other big area that is management accounting. So the weighting is the same for both financial accounting and management accounting. You've got the same weighting on the exam. Both are tested equally. However, the amount of studying required is far greater for financial accounting than it is for management accounting. And the reason for that is the body of knowledge for financial accounting is much larger than the body of knowledge required for management accounting. Now, a second challenge that Indian CAs have when it comes to technical is tax, okay? Tax, the good thing about tax is that unless you choose tax as your role on day two, you don't need to know a lot of the complexities. You just need to know the basics, basic compliance typically. Very, very minimal knowledge is required when it comes to more sophisticated tax planning. So at the end of the day, you need to know things like how to compute taxable income. You need to know what's deductible. The reason why I say it's a second challenge is financial accounting is the area with the greatest amount of knowledge. So that we'll put that number one. Tax is probably number two because even though the knowledge base required for tax is not as great as for financial accounting, nevertheless, it's a challenge for a foreign CA because, as we said earlier, taxation in Canada, I think, I'm no expert on Indian tax, but I know it's very different. So even though the body of knowledge is not huge, it's new information. Amit is asking, since writing cases new to Indian CAs, do you have a specific module where only writing cases are taught? We spend a huge amount of time in our course teaching you how to write cases. That is a huge, it's a huge component of the past course. We have you writing a far greater number of cases than our Canadian students. We take up these cases with you in class, in a virtual class. We have them professionally marked. We even have private counseling sessions where you meet with a marker to go over some of your exams. So yes, it's a major component of the past course because we realize that for Indian CAs, that probably is the biggest challenge, learning how to write cases effectively. Now, what about the other competencies, audit, finance, and governance? For audit and governance, you pick up most of the knowledge that you need from writing cases. Yes, you will have to do some studying in assurance beyond what you write in the cases. For example, you'll have to learn about the different reports you can give. But when it comes to things like risk, materiality, when it comes to planning in general, when it comes to procedures, when it comes to controls, that you pick up primarily through case writing. Governance, you pick up virtually 100% of it through case writing, strategy, and governance. Finance, you may have to spend a little bit of time on the notes. The notes aren't terribly long, but you'd have to go through the notes that we provide you with. But finance, to a large degree on the CFE, is number one quantitative. So if you know how to do certain basic quants like NPV, valuations, etc., you're a large part of the way there. And even the qualitative portion of finance is not terribly sophisticated as long as you don't choose finance as your depth area. If you choose it as your depth area, then the body of knowledge is going to be quite a bit greater. Let me take a look here. Nikunj has a question. So we can say if we opt tax, there would be basic law related questions or case studies and not tax planning and related. Okay, Nikunj, I'm not trying to understand your question, but are you saying to me if we don't choose tax? Because if you don't choose tax, then it's primarily compliance and you don't need to know a great deal when it comes to the sophisticated tax planning. If you do choose tax as your depth area on day two, then they will test a lot of the more sophisticated tax planning. Did I understand your question correctly? Please tell me if I didn't. Let's give you a minute. I did. Okay, wonderful. So this completes the portion of the session that I'm doing. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and Ira will share his screen and start with part 4, the past program for Indian CAs.
So I'm starting at part number 4. Okay. So who are we? Like, who is past? Here's some, just a little bit of information on us. We've been doing this obviously for a long time, over 25 years. We've done it for all the big firms. We currently do the PwC program across Canada. And we've been doing that for many years. Michael did very well when he wrote. He actually got the gold medal, which is huge. And over the years, I think we've had really good feedback from students. So that's just a brief summary of who are we. So, all right, what we have designed is we've designed a program specifically for Indian and international students, of which most are from India. It includes 3 things: technical training, case writing, and personal counseling. This is an overall picture. part of the program is self-study. 2 things for self-study. Number 1, you have a technical binder, you watch the technical videos. That's an ongoing process. We give you the binder online, and we also give it to you in hard copy. Number 2, you'll be doing some cases on your own. Once you've watched the introduction to case writing, you can then do practice cases. In fact, when people sign up for the course, I give a bunch of practice cases. They're not to be handed in. I don't know who does them, but depending on when you sign up for the course, if you sign up several months before the classes begin, why not get started and already start practicing some cases after you've watched the introduction to case writing? So, and in addition to that, hopefully you're going to write other cases from recent CFEs over the course of the time period when you're studying. And that's also stuff you're doing on your own. But we also have the formal instruction. So obviously you're going to write cases for us, hand them in, we're going to mark them, and then we're going to have a take-up class. We also do technical sessions live, financial accounting, I think all of them are live, management accounting, a portion of them are live. We also have certain sessions, point D, called technique sessions. I'll show you these afterwards. They're basically techniques of certain things you can do to help you increase your chances of moving up to competent. And we have personal counseling, where you meet with a marker who sits down with you for half an hour and goes over your case. So I call that the formal instruction, and the first part was the self-study. Now, the technical studying, as I just said, we do live financial accounting and some of management accounting. We have videos on everything. So the sessions, the stuff we don't do live, the other competency areas, like audit, tax, we have videos on everything. Even the stuff we do live, we record it, and then you have access to the videos. So, look, this is a very important part of your studying. Many people learned technical many years ago. You may not be familiar with Canada's tax system. You may not be familiar with ASPE. We cover, I'm not going to say it's 100%, but we really do cover the overwhelming majority of major topics for every competency. So there's no question, if you want to look at it in its most simplest form, this exam can be divided up between 50-50. 50% is knowing your technical. But the other 50% is case writing and applying the technical. But, it's hard to apply technical if you don't know the technical. The case writing, as I just said, is both self-marking, either the practice cases that I give you or some recent CFEs that you're going to probably be writing, and marking cases that we mark. So you hand in a lot of cases for marking. We mark them, we give you comments. That's a very important piece. That's how you learn how to improve your case writing. And we have classes, we have case take-ups. They're live, and then we record them. And then we have the technique sessions. So if you want to see an example of a case take-up, you can have a look here. Here's a link to a session, and here's a link to a technical take-up. Now, the personal counseling sessions, we give 3 of them, which I think is a pretty good number. What that means, you hand in the case to be marked. The marker that marks your case sets up probably a Zoom session with you for half an hour and goes over your case. Okay, so we do that 3 times, which again, I think is a pretty decent number. The other cases that we mark, the marker will give you, hopefully, extensive comments on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. That's a very important piece to get feedback from the marker. Now, if you have a CA from India or Pakistan, you're not required to take Capstone 1 and 2. Okay, Capstone 1 is important for day 1 of the CFE. And Capstone 2 is really just practice case writing. we do have an alternative to Capstone 2. In our program, we incorporate really both Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Okay? I'll explain a little more afterwards when I get into the pricing, how we do that. So look, this is kind of an important slide. I mean, our goal is to help you pass. So we try to do everything we can to make life easier for you. As it says here, the courses provide for maximum flexibility. We offer stuff live online. Everything is on video, available 24/7. There are no maximums. You can watch videos as much as you want, whenever you want. And even some sessions we do on IST time for those people living in India. We'll do the session 9 in the morning, which will be about 7:30, I think, at night in India. So you want a bird's eye view over the whole course. It's approximately 30 classes. There's lots of videos. I'm not saying you have to watch every single technical video. If you study technical in the binder and you're happy with it and you know the topic, you don't have to watch the video, but we have videos. We mark a lot of cases. Might be a little less, it might be 23, something like that, of cases. That includes the Capstone 2 marking. I'll explain that again when I do the pricing. And we've got 3 personal counseling sessions. I think we're the only ones, to be totally honest, I think we're the only ones in Canada that have a comprehensive course for Indian students. Just understand what I mean when I say a comprehensive course. Okay, that may not be totally obvious. What we could have done for people from India is we could have taken our case writing course in the summer. We have a course in the summer called our comprehensive course. I could have taken that course and said, okay, here, just join the Canadian students and go to the case writing course in the summer. We never thought that would be sufficient. So what we did is we took our existing courses and technical and binders, we threw everything and into this course and designed a course for Indian students that incorporates everything. Why did we do that? I think people from India need it. That's the truth. I don't think it's sufficient. We don't think it's sufficient if you just go and take our summer course. So, I can go and give you a case writing course. And to be honest, that's some of the other providers out there, that's kind of what they do. They call it an Indian program. You're taking exactly the same course that the Canadian students are taking. It's much, much less than ultimately what we're offering. And again, it's not that I'm dying to offer like everything here. We've had to cut the price tremendously. I'll show you that in a few minutes, compared to what we'd be charging Canadian students in order to make this affordable. But the problem is we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. I want to offer something that it is not too costly, but the problem is it's got to include a lot of stuff in order to properly prepare you. Okay. Looking at schedules. All right. So version 1 versus version 2. Okay. So there's 2 CFEs, right? The end of May and mid-September. For the September CFE, when you look at our website, we have 2 versions. This is really simple. Version 1 and version 2. If you sign up for the CFE in September, you choose one of the 2 versions. It forces you to make a choice. What's the difference? The only difference is that in version 1, we give you cases in January, February, and March. And in version 2, those same cases are written in the summer, in July. That's it. We try to encourage people to choose version 1. You're not locked in. You could choose version 1 and then not write in January, February, March, and then write and not even tell us, and then write them in the summer. The website forces you to make a choice. We try to encourage version 1. But if you got really unbelievably busy and I don't know, the February exam came up and you were too busy to write it, okay, so you have another shot and you can write it and have a live class in July and hand it in for marking in July. That's all. So we encourage version 1. if people register before January. But if you're going to register for the course, like in March, I'm going to say, forget it, just do version 2. We've already run 2 of the 3 cases. It's not worth it. Just do version 2. You want to write the one in March coming up. If you register before the last one, go write the last one and watch it, and attend the class. No problem. So it's very, very flexible. I'm just explaining this because it kind of forces you to make a choice of version 1 or version 2. So if you sign up before January, before the 3 cases, choose version 1. Otherwise, choose version 2. So that begs the question, so when are people starting? Now, you could start anytime. There is obviously an advantage to starting early. That's always advantageous. For May, starting now would be really good. In fact, our classes begin in November. There's enough time. There's still enough time before May. For September, start anytime. I say no later than January, but the reality is people do start later than January and they're okay for September. Part of it depends on, how much time you have during the week. Are you working full time? Do you have evenings? Do you have weekends? Earlier is always better. Okay, so, that just gives you kind of an idea. If you want to write in May, you're right in September. I'll also throw out something which I'm not saying I would go in trying to do this, but just know it's a possibility. You could sign up with us for the May CFE, and you could change your mind 1 or 2 months later, or even 3 months later. There's no cost to that. We just move you into the next batch for September. The only thing you have to be worried about is that they're going to ask you, CPA is going to ask you to pay for the CFE at some point. They give you about 30 days. For May, this is going to be somewhere in January. Might even go into early February. Once you pay for the CFE, if you want to cancel or move it to the next CFE, they will retain some of what you paid. There will be a cost. That's not to us, that's to CPA. So that's really the only potential monetary problem if you change your mind and you don't want to write in May and you want to write in September. But if you sign up with us for May and then change to September, there's no cost. I just move you into the next batch. The only thing we're not going to let you do is write a case twice and hand it in twice for marking. If you do that, we charge you a marking fee for one of the times. I don't think I had one person do this in the past year because it's unusual. If you've already handed it in for marking, why would you hand it in a second time for marking? You already know the case. You've already handed it in for marking. Now, you may want to write it again. Okay, fine. Go write it on your own again and mark yourself. But if you're going to ask us to mark the same case, the same question twice, we would have to charge for that. That is so unusual. Okay, like I say, that is really not so relevant because nobody does that. How many hours a week? 10, 15 hours a week. This assumes you're working. Yeah, you can work full time. It's not a problem. You start now for May, not a problem. You can work full time. That should be enough time, unless you tell me something crazy, like you have a job that, I don't know, is taking 80 hours a week, then we have a problem. So over the years, we have many, testimonials. I'm not going to read all these out or whatever. You can kind of see these. We have many testimonials from people that, that passed their CFE. Look at this one, passed their CFE, been out of school for 14 years, passed the exam. Again, you can kind of look at this when you watch the video. I don't have to sit here and read that out. I'll just focus on a couple of some interesting points. People like the customized study program, the binders of presentations, the techniques that I mentioned before, which I'll explain. I think it comes up afterwards. Okay, that we do. This person liked the techniques. And here's one. Pass in the first attempt, targeted approach. Okay, fine. Lectures were helpful. All right. So let's talk about to spend a few minutes on registration and fees. So to register, you go to the website. Fine. This is a link for CAs living in Canada. for, Indian CAs living in Canada and Indian CAs currently not living in Canada, you go to this. All right, two separate links, fine. Now, we have a relationship with the ICAI, the Toronto chapter. So you join the chapter, you're eligible for a 15% discount. We give the same discount for people living in India. Okay, it's just a deal that we do. We give you a coupon code for the 15%. There are three options. It's really kind of two, but I'm going to call it three for how you register. Option one, we call it the pass course plus the alternative to capstone 1 and 2. Option 3, you take the pass course, but you don't take the alternative to capstone 1 and 2. And option 2, you take our course and then you go to capstone 1 and 2. Not so realistic for 98% of the people from India. Let's look at them and I'll walk you through each one. Option 1 is the most popular option. You're signing up for our course. The fee is $27.95. We give a 15% discount. 2 months before the CFE, we send an email and we tell you to buy the capstone material for $250. You pay that to CPA. This is your total cost. The reason this is the most popular is because what we're doing in option 1 is we are marking all of the past cases in the course, plus we are marking the capstone 2 cases. Effectively, it's like you're taking capstone 2. The only difference is you're taking it through us. You're giving me the case to mark. You're not giving CPA the case to mark. You are writing the identical cases. So you're not going to capstone 2, but you're taking what we call the alternative to capstone 1 and 2. So you're writing a lot of cases. If you want to see how many, it's actually 22. You're writing 2 day 1 practice cases, 4 day 2, and 16 day 3. That includes the capstone 2 marking. This is the most popular option because people want us to mark a lot of cases. And it makes sense. I agree, like that is helpful. There is a second option. Hardly anybody does this unless you're in a particular situation. You take our course without the capstone 2 marking. And then you go to capstone 1 and 2 on your own. Well, they charge you $13.25 for capstone 1 and 2. Now, our course drops from $27.95 to $19.95 because we're not marking your capstone 2 cases. That's an $800 difference, minus 15%. So it's really a $680 difference. $16.95, do the math, that's $680 less, let me go back, than $23.75 if we're marking the capstone 2. So if you want to know what we're charging you for the capstone 2 marking, it's $800 minus 15%. That's a difference. But then you got to pay capstone 1 and 2, $26.50 about, so it costs a lot more. So it's not great. Like, we do not recommend you do this. And it's not only because it costs more. We don't recommend you do it because capstone 1, there's a lot of useless stuff. It wastes a lot of time. Canadian students have no choice. They have to go to capstone 1. You have a choice. If you have a CA from India or Pakistan, you have a choice. So take advantage of that. Forget the money. I would be recommending you don't go to capstone 1, regardless. I don't care if it's free. It's way too much wasted time. They are teaching you things in capstone 1 you do not need for the CFE. Example, group work. They're teaching you group work. This is not a group exam. You do not write with other people. You do not need to know how to work in a group when you write this exam. Maybe it's a helpful skill for life, but not for this exam. Presentation skill. You do a presentation for capstone 1. You don't need that skill for this exam. So they're teaching you other stuff that you don't really need for the exam. We are hyper-focused on the exam. So who does this? Option 2. You know who does this? A person works for an accounting firm or an industry, and they force you to go, or they pay for you and say, we want you to go. You don't have a choice, you go. Okay. But 99% or 98% of people from India will not do this second option. But option 3, a more legitimate option, you take our course without the capstone 2 marking. So we go back to the $19.95 minus the 15% discount. It's $16.95. Now, why do I have the $250 here? You're not having us mark the capstone 2 cases. But when I send the email and I tell everybody, buy the capstone 2, you're going to probably want to buy it because it's useful. It's your only practice day 1 cases from that material. It is worth spending the $250. But in option 3, you're not going to give me the cases to mark. You'll mark them on your own. So this is a cheaper option. So people that do this option, it's usually a money thing. They want the cheaper course. Okay, fine. So it's $16.95. That's really the price to us. The $250 you pay to, you don't have to buy that, but anyway, you pay that to CPA, not to us. Okay, so it's fewer cases. We do have people taking option 3. Everything else in the course is identical. All the classes, all the videos, all the material. The only difference between option 1 and option 3 is whether or not we mark those capstone 2 cases. We are still marking cases. We're still marking cases. We're still marking, look at the bottom. We're still marking 2-day 2 cases and 8-day 3 cases. We would never give you a course where we don't mark cases. But we're not marking as many. Which is why a lot of people prefer option 1 if they can make the pricing work. We recommend it. We strongly recommend option 1 because we know that you benefit by writing more cases and getting more feedback. That's why. And you're not wasting time on capstone 1. Okay, fine. You're not wasting time on capstone 1. That's only option 2. But if you have limited funds, do option 3. People, I'm not going to tell you what really happened here. Why do we have these 2 options? I'll tell you the history in 30 seconds, and you'll really understand this. Back 4 or 5 years ago, people from India had no choice, and they had to go to capstone 1 and 2 under the MOU. The price of our course was $16.95. Option 3. But you had to pay for capstone 1 and capstone 2. That was like option 2, which is much more expensive. Then they changed the rule under the MOU. They said you don't have to go to capstone 1 and 2. We got a little nervous that you're not going to write enough cases. We knew no one's going to go. People don't generally like spending $1,300 for capstone 1 and $1,300 for capstone 2. So we knew very few students would go. But we got a little nervous. So we said, okay, you know what? We'll offer the capstone 2 marking. We have to bump up the price. That's our biggest cost. Our biggest cost is to pay markers, professional CPAs, to sit there for 20, 30, 40 minutes and mark your case. So we said, okay, fine. We'll do it as cheaply as we can. We bumped up the price by $800 minus the 15% discount, so it's $680. And we'll give people a choice. You want to choose, you want to have us mark the capstone 2 cases? That's option 1, $23.75 after the discount. You don't want us to mark the capstone 2? You want to go back to the original plan? We've had no inflation. Maybe the only people in Canada. Okay, $16.95. You want to go to $16.95? We won't mark the capstone 2. That is how this whole thing evolved. We're now sitting here with 2 options. Most people want us to mark the capstone 2 marking. We recommend it. But if you can't make it work, then, choose option 3. But to help you, what we do is, payment is generally made through a credit card. Okay, fine. That's not such a big deal. But we give installment plans. There's no interest. And we are flexible on the number of installments. Now, obviously, we try to have people do the installment plans and keep them within a reasonable number of months, maybe 4 or 5, 6 months. Okay, if you need more, we could talk about it, whatever. We are flexible. Okay, and there's no interest. So some people don't do the installment plan. They just pay up front through credit card. But other people do the installment plan. When you do the installment plan, you are not paying anything when you register. I send you instructions. It's very easy. You send me a follow-up email, and after you register, you don't pay anything. And you send me a follow-up email with the credit card information and how many installments you want and which day of the month. That's it. So when you inquire about the course, when I speak to you, or when Michael speaks to you, we just send you a little sheet, here's how you can register and get the discount. And if you want installments, fine. If you don't want installments, you just register online and you pay with a credit card. So what's the total fee for this whole thing? Well, again, our course, if you're taking option 1 with the capstone 2 fee, is about $26.25. And then there's a few other fees. I don't know. There's the registration fee, CPA. I'm using CPA Ontario. It's similar to if you're from a different province. I don't know, CPA Ontario, 125. The C fee, the annual fee, about $675 approximately. The C fee, about $1,700. And then if you're not in Canada, I guess flying to Canada. If you are in Canada, you're looking at about $5,000. Okay, that's Canadian. Okay, that's the total. I don't know, I'm just adding up all your fees. All right, registration with the CPA Provincial Institute. In order to write this exam, probably many of you know this and have already done it, you have to register with the Provincial Institute. If you're in Ontario, with Ontario. If you're out west, you register with the Western School of Business. Now, people, this is a very important point, especially if you haven't registered yet. What's the timing of when you have to register? If you're writing in May, please register anytime in the fall, September, October, November, if you're writing in May. Don't wait till January. They'll probably tell you it's too late. Okay, even though it's 4 months or 5 months. Don't wait till January. Do it in the latter half of the year. The problem is if you do it before June 30th, then they could charge you for the first half of the year. But if you do it in the latter half of the year, you save on that fee and you're fine. If you're writing in September, register in January, February. But be careful. Don't leave it too long. Ontario is very slow. They're 8 to 12 weeks. You start fooling around and wanting to register in March or April, could be a problem. They'll tell you it's too late because you have to pay for the C fee, maybe in May, and we're not going to have you registered by then. So once you start the process, you're okay. Once you get into the system with the Provincial Institute, we do not really get involved in that. We cannot really add value to that. Because of privacy and confidentiality, I don't see half the stuff anyway. So we don't really help with that. We don't know when people are registered with the Institute. Yeah, it doesn't matter for our course. You don't need to be registered with the Institute to take our course. This is something you do. It's a hassle. You go back and forth. It's just bureaucratic. The good news, as long as you have an Indian CA or Pakistan CA, you will not have a problem. I don't know if I've had one person, and I don't know how many years we've been doing this since the MOU came out, where the person said, yeah, I wanted to write, but I couldn't register with the Institute and I couldn't write. I don't think it's ever happened. As long as you have a CA from India, a legitimate CA, you'll be able to register with the Institute. The only thing is don't start the process too late. That can happen. Then you have to write the next time. Okay? So you can start with pass. I just said this. You don't have to register with the Institute, and Ontario's slow, 8 to 12 weeks. They're faster out west. They're a little faster out west, but I would still look at the timelines I just gave you. For May, do it now. October, November. And for September, do it January, February. Now, doesn't matter which institute. So hopefully this is basic and everyone knows this. The CFE is a Canadian exam. It does not matter really where you write. I could write in Ontario and then the next day live the rest of my life in Vancouver. I could practice anywhere in Canada. The only real stipulation is that you have to write the CFE in the province in which you register. So if you know you're going to be living, let's say an example, if I'm currently in Vancouver and I know I'm moving to Ontario a month from now and I want to write the CFE in Ontario, then register with Ontario. The fact you don't live in Ontario now, who cares? I'm going to write the CFE in Ontario. If you move and you registered with a different province, not a big deal. You just go and you transfer the registration. You have to call them and tell them, and then they'll just move you to the other provincial institute. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, nobody cares. Trust me, after you get your CPA, I don't think you'll be asked this question your entire life. But which province did you write the exam in? Totally irrelevant. I think very similar actually to India. I don't think it matters which province I write in, as long as I have an Indian CA. Okay, here's some useful links. You guys can look at this if you want to see for Ontario, people living in India, the Western School of Business. All right, people, just to finish off, Part 9, Planning Immigration. Look, we do not get involved very much at all in immigration. It's not our expertise. Some basics. There's 4 ways, 4 visa types to plan your CPA exam. You want to do a tourist visa, that will work in Ontario. A work visa will work anywhere. The PR is probably the best. The study visa across Canada. So, look, the study visa, I said the PR is the best. I don't know. Here I'm saying the study visa is the most preferred way. Immigration's gone through a lot of changes in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, it has not gotten easier. It's not so easy to get the PR. But if you're already here, great. If you're not already here, okay, here's some basic guidance. Okay, here's some basic guidance. But my real recommendation is go call someone or email someone who actually knows about immigration. We have a person that we've dealt with who I think is very good. And this company Globazon or whatever, that's his email. So if you don't live here, or if you know of someone who does not live here, they're from India, and they want help on the immigration side, write this email. Okay, we are just not knowledgeable enough to really give enough information and for you to rely on us. Okay, our contact information, people throughout this exam, people call us, they contact us. It's not like you sign up for this course and then you're left like, I don't know, with like 0 support. We are available. Okay, here's our emails. Here's our phone numbers. There's our WhatsApp number. We're calling from India. That's a website, fine. Okay, so, students call us all the time with questions. We answer questions. I don't really care which way you reach me or Michael. We do answer a lot of questions. So we give a decent, I think, amount of support. It's part of the whole program. We are available to answer questions. And I think it's something, you'll see that in a lot of the comments, in the testimonials that people appreciate. So, 4 important takeaways, and then I'm done. Number 1, I didn't talk about this. I think Michael mentioned this. I didn't talk about this, but please plan to write the CFE in 25 or 26. The system is undergoing major change in 27. We have no idea what's going to happen, meaning with the MOU. There won't be a CFE in 27. Maybe it'll get easier. Maybe it'll get harder. I have no idea. Maybe they'll force people from India to do the identical thing as Canadians. Who the heck knows? Well, it's a huge risk. So if you know of anyone that is considering this, there is a window now. There is a window. They could start the process and they could write in 26 and they'll be fine. 27, I don't know. All bets are off for 2027. Number 2, you can do this working full time. It does not matter where you live. You can live in India, you could live in Canada, you could live in the Middle East. It makes no difference where you live. The only stipulation is you have to go to Canada to write the exam in one of the provinces. Number 3, starting early is a big part of it. That is very helpful. Practice is critical. So starting early, you are increasing your chances of passing dramatically by starting early. And what I call starting early, I don't know, November, December, for May. I've even had people start in January. And again, depending on how much time they have and they passed for May. But the truth is, the closer we get to the CFE, when you're starting very late, you may not have enough time to write the cases or study the technical. That becomes a problem. And number 4, technical review is critical, but you don't need perfect technical before you start writing cases. This is an important point. You are not going to finish your technical before you start writing cases. Go in with that assumption. I don't care when you register. If you registered 6 months ago, I don't think you'd finish your technical in 6 months. You're still going to have to start writing cases before you finish your technical, and you'll improve your technical by writing cases. It's just the way the system works. It's really a combined approach. Now, if you start earlier and you want to spend a couple of months on technical just to get your feet wet, great. But you won't be finished. You're still going to write cases. There's still going to be things you don't know technically. But you're going to pick up technical points and you're going to learn about case writing the sooner you get into case writing. So that, I think, is a very important point. I don't think it's totally intuitive or obvious. You'll write cases, but you will not have finished your studying for your technical. Now, people, I know I said before, I just want to maybe not correct, but I guess explain something I said before about those techniques. I think Michael had that on a slide earlier, and I forgot that it was his slide or whatever, where he showed those techniques that we have in our comprehensive course. They're not really technical, but they're techniques of things you could do to move up the levels. Okay, I'm not going into the whole passing profile now. We do that on the first session. But when I say move up the levels, that's the whole goal. So we have these technique sessions. I'm just saying that now because I mentioned it before and I didn't explain it. We have these technique sessions in financial accounting and auditing, in quantitative, that are very important sessions, and they help you move up the levels, which is important to passing. So at the end of the day, okay, fine, you work in Canada, okay, fine, here's a little connection. I don't know who we heard speak or whatever. We have whatchamacallit, just a reference here. You can contact them. Okay, if you want to see a video, if you're not already in Canada, whatever, we have a short video on life in Canada. And that's the bottom line. At the end of the day, this is a very doable process. This MOU, I think, is an amazing thing. It's really led to a lot of CAs from India and Pakistan get their CPA in Canada by going directly to the final exam once you have a CA from India or Pakistan. It's a huge win. You don't have to quit work. It's doable. You have to study. I'm not saying you can study 2 days and get it, but you're getting a degree that could affect you for the rest of your life. Like, it's a huge thing. And you can do it while studying while you're working. That's an amazing thing. How many degrees out there can you say I can work full time and get such a valuable degree like in Canada that could literally change my whole working life for the next 40 years? So I think this thing is huge. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know what, like I say, I don't know what's going to happen in 2027. I think all bets are off, but while it lasts and while it's been here, I think it's been very, very good for people from India who have a CA from India. It's a great advantage and great opportunity to take consideration of. Okay, I hope that was useful. And that kind of really ends my presentation.